Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us tmosso@the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Today, we discuss something unusual. A new North American watchmaker, the Swiss-educated, Vancouver-based Canadian watchmaker Bradley Taylor, launched his eponymous brand with the Paragon in 2021, and for 2022, he launched his follow-up model. This is the Lutria, a watch made as you see it here in 24 pieces in stainless steel with a neon blue guilloche dial, and neon blue is exactly as this is described in the paperwork for the watch. So the timepiece is extraordinary on many levels, one of which is its wearability. In steel, this case, which is identical to the previous Paragon, is 39 millimeters in diameter. It's 10 millimeters thick as I measure it, and from lug tip to lug tip, he claims 47, I measure 47, so that's a good match. 20 millimeters is the spacing between the lugs. I'll throw this watch on my wrist, and you can see it's a beautiful fit. It's not quite 20th century dress watch size, it's a bit bigger than that, but 39 for a two-hand automatic and all-arounder in 2024, this feels just about perfect. This feels like it's right where the market is at the moment. And I think this size, these proportions will always look attractive. It easily fits underneath the cuff, and as you can see down the barrel, the watch's lugs are well inboard the edge of my wrist, so I think you can get away with this on a 14 centimeter circumference wrist, maybe even 13 and a half if your wrist is flat across the top. This over-the-top view always exaggerates the width. Look at this. Down the barrel is always definitive. That's how much clearance I have. Now, I learn something new every day. That's why I would never call myself an expert. So when I noticed this isn't exactly a typical scale, I decided to do a little bit of research, and Bradley Taylor, sure enough, is using beaver tail leather. And this is the only time I've ever seen beaver tail leather on a watch strap. I've seen just about every other animal. I've seen salmon, I've seen toad, I've seen elephant. Beaver tail seems both inventive and somehow it seems to fit a Canadian-made watch. It is a very dark blue, almost navy. There is some bolstering to give it volume. It's got a sheer cut edge with lacquering to give it refinement, and as you can see, this is a Bradley Taylor factory strap. The leather on the bottom, unmarred, ungouged, uncrimped, beautifully purple, and then a very simple pin buckle. This is the only part of the watch that feels a little bit like an afterthought. Without any kind of bespoke design or branding, it doesn't necessarily set up a high luxury experience, and then you see the movement. Now, at face value, this is a Vaucher base. But what I need to tell you right here, and what you really need to register, is that the amount of hand finishing bestowed on this movement by Patek Philippe alumnus Bradley Taylor elevates it to the level of high art. You would also be surprised that this crown in its screwed out position is part of a water sealing scheme that gives us 120 meters of water resistance. So this is an extraordinary all-arounder. I wouldn't describe this as a pure dress watch. I would describe this as an all-the-time type watch. So taking a quick look at the bridges, you could see how they've been individually decorated. The stripes are beautifully narrow, consistent, dense, and shaded, which is always the sign of good Côte de Genève. And then we have bevels that are really a mile wide. We're approaching Laurent Ferrier levels of quality here, both in terms of how broad and mirrored they are, and then in terms of how deeply these inward angles are drawn. A little bit like Philippe Dufour, they're drawn a bit up and over the bridge to give them more depth, and they're super sharp down the center. Where bevels meet in sharp creases, I always explain to people that type of angle is one of the toughest challenges if you're finishing a watch, and it's the kind of thing you can really only do if A, you've got a lot of skill, and B, you're making additions of 24 pieces. Now, it's an automatic winder with a lovely guilloche cut and polished and beveled micro rotor. It's a 22 karat micro rotor. It energizes a 48-hour power reserve. All this beaten away at 3 hertz. It's a 29 joule movement, adjusted in 5 positions, which is the standard for high horology and chronometers. You can also see it's free sprung with all of the timing adjustments done by hairspring manipulation, as well as by turning the eccentric screws on the balance spokes. So it can be adjusted very finely thanks to this architecture, but this also makes it more shock tolerant. The engine turning on the base plate is handsome. The satination on the wheels is attractive, but it's really these bevels on the bridges that are the highlight here. Screw heads are polished. and it's a thin movement. It's only 2.6 millimeters thick. That's part of the advantage of a micro rotor. You get the convenience of an automatic, but the big open caseback vista unobstructed, and then a thin movement, in both cases just like a manual wind watch. So, taking a look at the case, it's all polished, and we can see some handsome nuances. We've got a slightly concave bezel that visually thins the watch out. You can see how we've got some tumble home. It's sort of bowl-shaped, thinner at its base, broader at its top. And then we have fluting on each one of the lugs. In vintage fashion, the conical crown, which looks a little bit like a Grunewald piece, it has no branding on it. It's sort of a vintage touch. Now, pull the crown out, you can see that the watch doesn't have hacking, but that's fine because it also doesn't have seconds. And it adjusts very nicely. There's very little angular, dead, unresponsive travel. Almost as soon as you start turning the crown, the hands travel. And again, it is a screw down because this is a hugely water-resistant watch. There is a vague or wave pattern across the dial, and these are genuine reductive cut dials. They're true guilloche. They are not stamped. We have a typeface created expressly for these watches by a typeface expert. So the numerals that you see here, exclusive to the model. We also have cabochon hours, and then there is a sort of frosted track outboard that better shows that neon blue color. The hands are, well, handmade. Each one consists of two pieces. There's the root that sits over the cannon pinion, and then there is the actual shaft of the hand itself. So to cut, polish, and then fire tint these hands, each one takes about 12 to 20 hours, and these are short, stubby hands that are that way by choice. Some people have said, well, maybe the hands are a bit too short here, but when you see such short, stubby hands, you realize, considering how thoughtfully designed this watch is, this was a deliberate choice and the aesthetic preference of the man whose name is on the dial. It was not an accident. So as with any auteur creator, someone who is distinctive in his ways, you either get it or you don't. And I get it. I like the fact that these hands are broad but not particularly long because it allows you to see their quality, how smooth and polished they are, how deburred and even the sides are, and also how evenly applied the heat treatment is, because getting this color is a lot tougher than getting blued screws. Blued is easy. You just fire it until it's dead. This requires a short, even application of heat and oxidation. There's a lot to love with this watch. A ton packed into a 39mm steel case. One to watch for the future. I can even say that they had nice even choice between the size of the movement and the size of the case. 30mm is the perfect size for this movement. And look at the case back with these proprietary square section screws that A, keep bad watchmakers out of the movement, and B, allow the artisan to apply more torque to these screws than if they were simple flatheads. Like I said, this watch is full of details and thoughtful refinements. You may also say that Bradley Taylor, who got his certificate in 2015, jumped over to Patek Philippe and then began working under his own name from 2020 forward. He is an up-and-comer, and he certainly put his stamp on this model right here. If this is just his second effort, I'm super excited to see where he goes. As ever, buying an early example from a great artist is the way to get ahead. Someday, we might all wish we bought two. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.